Have you ever seen someone walk into a courtroom as if it were their family business? That's exactly how she appeared. She slipped through the door with earbuds in and her eyes on her phone, walking straight down the center aisle past rows of older faces that watched her. She sat at the defendant's table without being asked, one leg crossed, phone held up like a small lit wall between her and the room. The clerk called her name once, then again, louder, before she finally glanced up, one earbud still in. "Yeah, I'm here," she said. From the back row came a quick whisper. Someone said her last name. Someone else added her father's title, the one people heard in evening news reports about ethics and personal responsibility. On the bench, the judge opened her file. 2 parking tickets, same license plate, same date. He skimmed, then looked closer. The first citation was near the college just after midnight. The second, across town by a government building with a restricted zone, less than an hour later. Same car. 2 places. One night that no longer looked simple. "Miss, this is a court of law," he said. "Please remove your earbud." She sighed, tugged one bud loose so it dangled against her shirt, and left the other in. "You're here on 2 charges of illegal parking issued the same night," he said. "Do you understand what you've been cited for?" "I saw the tickets," she replied. "I wasn't really worried. I figured my dad already took care of it." The word "dad" moved through the room like a draft. A woman in a faded coat shook her head. A man in a work jacket looked down at his folded hands. These were people who had taken time off and counted dollars to pay fines. No one had ever taken care of it for them. The judge tapped the folder once with his pen. "Who was driving the car that night?" She turned her phone face down. "I don't know," she said. "We were out. Friends were using the car. It's not a big deal. I shouldn't even have these. I thought this was already handled." The quiet in the gallery thickened. It wasn't about a painted curb anymore. It was about the ease in her voice, when she spoke of rules, as if they could be erased. The judge looked up from the paper and studied her. The small half-smile on her lips didn't match her hands, which pressed into the sides of the phone until her knuckles paled. "Let me be sure I understand," he said. "You came here expecting these tickets to disappear because of who your father is. Is that correct?" She hesitated, eyes dropping to the tabletop. "That's usually what happens," she admitted. He leaned back slightly, the thin file still open between them. 2 little slips of city paper had just turned into something much larger, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. She straightened a little, as if remembering who she was supposed to be. 22, impeccably dressed, daughter of a man who built his public image on sermons about integrity. People in the state knew his speeches. "Accountability is the backbone of a healthy society." He said it so often that seniors in the room could probably quote it better than she could. But his daughter, she wore that surname like armor. When the judge asked what she did for work, she exhaled through her nose, a brief, almost theatrical sigh. "I'm with the department," she said. "I help out. Mostly administrative things." The judge paused long enough to let the unspoken truth settle. "A job arranged, not earned." Someone in the front row raised an eyebrow. Another leaned slightly forward, listening with the alertness of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize when a young person's confidence came from borrowed authority. "And the night of the incident," the judge asked, "where were you coming from?" She shifted in her seat. The earbud finally slipped onto the desk, forgotten. "I was out. That's all." "Out where?" "I don't keep track of every detail, Your Honor." But she did keep track. Too well. Her eyes darted sideways, hunting for a safer answer. The judge saw it. The whole room saw it. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a single folded sheet, setting it carefully before him. "It might help if you read this," she said. trying for nonchalance. Her tone was soft, but carried a sharpness, like she was presenting a trump card. The judge lifted the page. A letter, on official stationery, signed by the deputy to her father. It urged consideration for her citations, suggesting they may have been issued in error and asking for administrative review before formal judgment. The judge's expression didn't change, but the air in the room did. Several people exchanged looks. Older Americans recognize influence when they see it. Subtle, polite, wrapped in government language. He placed the paper on the bench with deliberate care. "Miss," he said, "are you offering this as evidence or as a warning?" She blinked, caught off guard. "It's just a letter," she muttered. "It's not a big deal. My dad's office sends things like that all the time. It's procedure." But the veneer was cracking. Her fingers tapped anxiously against the table. Light, frantic touches that betrayed the tension running beneath her slow, practiced voice. "And yet," the judge said, "it wasn't included in the file. You brought it personally." She swallowed. "I didn't want this dragging out. I thought it would make things simpler." There it was again. Simplicity, not justice. The assumption that systems were pliable, that rules were flexible as long as the right letter arrived from the right office. The gallery reacted in small, human ways. A quiet scoff, a disbelieving shake of the head, a sympathetic sigh from someone who had probably lost a day's wages for a trivial infraction once upon a time. "Miss," the judge said, "I'll ask again. Where exactly were you when these tickets were issued?" She looked down. "I don't remember." "You remembered to bring that letter," he said gently, "but not where you were." For the first time, the mask faltered. Her shoulders tensed, and her voice thinned. "It was late. I wasn't really paying attention. I just know I didn't do anything wrong." The judge studied her, as if trying to read. Not the polished surface, but the tremor underneath it. He could see something. Not merely arrogance, but fear. Not the kind that makes a person run, but the kind that makes them act like nothing matters at all. "Miss," he said quietly, "I need you to answer the question." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then stared straight ahead, as if refusing to look anywhere else might keep the truth from catching up to her. She had walked in with the air of someone who never faced consequences. But now, in the silence of this small courtroom, her confidence was thinning, thread by thread. Under the weight of a single, simple question, she could no longer talk her way around. The judge returned to the file, sliding the papers slowly, as if giving her one last chance to speak. She didn't. So he examined the second citation again. Timestamp, location, officer's notes. Then tilted his head, reading it a second time. "Miss," he said, voice steady but edged with curiosity. "You told this court your car stayed near campus, but this ticket wasn't issued anywhere near there." She stiffened. "This one," he continued, tapping the page, "was written outside the state office complex, your father's building, 40 minutes after the first citation on the opposite side of the city. Same plate. Same car." Her silence was immediate and heavy. The gallery felt it before she reacted. A few older attendees leaned in. They'd lived long enough to recognize when a young person's story had a gap big enough to swallow them whole. "I didn't say it never moved," she replied finally. "I said I didn't remember where I was." "That's a significant distance not to remember," he said. Before she could respond, a sound came from the third row, a slow scrape of a chair. An elderly man rose, holding a baseball cap against his chest. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm but steady, "I was there that night." Every eye shifted to him. "I saw that car," he continued. "It blocked the emergency lane. Ambulance had to swing around it." The effect was immediate. Older Americans in the room reacted with instinctive disapproval. An ambulance blocked is an unspoken violation of community values. A grocery clerk in the back shook her head. A retired teacher folded her arms tightly. Respect for emergency services runs deep among people who grew up long before smartphones and shortcuts. The girl's jaw clenched. He must be mistaken. But the man didn't look at her. He looked at the judge. "I remember the plate," he said. "I said something to the officer that night. He said he'd issue the ticket." The judge nodded once. "Thank you, sir. You may sit." The man returned to his seat without triumph or bitterness, just the quiet certainty of someone who'd seen enough of the world to know when the truth needed saying. The judge lifted the letter she had brought, the one from the deputy in her father's office, and examined its top corner again. Then he noticed something. "This letter is dated," he said. "Dated one day before." These citations were issued. Several people inhaled sharply. She froze, the color draining from her face. "It must be a mistake," the judge asked mildly. "An administrative error?" His tone wasn't sarcastic. It was precise. He set the letter down slowly. "Miss, can you explain why an official request for leniency was prepared before the violations occurred?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time since entering the courtroom, her confidence didn't just waver, it fractured. She pressed her palms against the table as if grounding herself, but her voice betrayed her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not what you think." "Then please," he said, "tell us what it is." Her breathing quickened. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Even the bailiff watched her with sharpened attention. "I didn't mean for any of this," she said, barely audible. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." The judge waited patiently. "I wasn't alone," she continued, "and things got complicated." But she didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't. The gallery sensed the shift. This wasn't just a girl shrugging off responsibility anymore. This was someone cornered by a truth far heavier than 2 parking violations. The elderly witness watched her quietly, not judging, but recognizing that beneath her bravado was someone who wasn't used to being questioned at all. The judge folded his hands. "Miss," he said calmly, "this court can only work with what you're willing to say. But what I see in these documents, and in your silence, tells me that the story behind these citations is much larger than you've admitted." Her eyes glistened for the briefest moment before she blinked it away. Something had cracked open, and everyone in that room knew the case was no longer about blocked curbs or painted zones. It had become a doorway into something deeper, something she could no longer pretend wasn't there. The judge lifted a hand gently, signaling her to sit back as she half rose from her chair in a sudden, nervous reflex. "Take a moment," he said. "We're going to look at this carefully." The hush that followed felt almost physical, like the whole room was holding its breath. He returned to the evidence, studying the photographs printed on the citations. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Timestamp, street sign, the car angled slightly over the line. Then he leaned closer. "Miss," he said, "the license plate in this photo isn't the same as the number on the vehicle you registered for this hearing." She blinked. "What?" "It's the same car." "It's the same model," he corrected, "but the plate differs by 1 letter." A small murmur rippled through the gallery, quiet but unmistakably concerned. The judge continued, voice even but heavy with implication. "Does your family own several vehicles of this exact make and year?" Her silence returned, thick, telling, almost defiant, but not confident. She wasn't refusing to answer. She simply couldn't shape the words. He tapped the citations again. These tickets were issued to different cars tied to the same household, arriving at the same office, at late hours, multiple times over recent months. He pulled up the archive on his monitor. Something routine, yet now startling in its clarity. 7 similar citations, he said. 3 months, all unresolved, all under review, all marked driver unidentified, and all vehicles registered to your family. The weight of the revelation settled like dust after a collapse. Of course she knew. Her fingers gripped the table's edge as if bracing against a sudden drop. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Miss, the pattern suggests someone in your household has been using these vehicles to avoid accountability. And from where I'm standing, you seem to be the one expected to absorb the consequences. The room was still. So still that the faint buzz of a ceiling vent sounded like static. Then she broke. Fine, she said, breath catching on the word. Yes, I was there that night. The admission wasn't shouted. It came out in a rush, raw, unpolished, almost frightened. But not because of the parking, not because of some ticket. Her voice wavered, faltered, then steadied in a way that didn't belong to the girl who'd walked in earlier, earbuds in and chin high. I went to my father's office, she said, because he wasn't there. That confused a few people. The judge waited, his expression unreadable. He was supposed to be in that building the next morning, she continued. Meeting, appearances, all the usual things. But he left the state without telling anyone except his staff. And they needed someone to pretend things were normal. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if reliving it. The hurried drive, the fear of failing a duty she never asked for. So, yes, she said quietly. I drove there. I stayed there. I moved the cars around like they told me, so security logs wouldn't show he was gone. The gallery reacted, not loudly, but with a collective tightening of posture, a slow, heavy exhale. It wasn't just wrongdoing, it was orchestration. And she had been the one carrying it. And the letter? The judge asked. Prepared before the violations. She nodded, defeated. They always prepare them early, just in case. I'm the one who hands them in. Just like that, her arrogance dissolved into something else entirely. A daughter used as a buffer, a stand-in, a shield. So when these tickets came, the judge said softly, you thought they were just another problem you were expected to clean up. She didn't answer, but the truth hung over her like a shadow. A young woman, raised in a house where mistakes were swept away before they reached the light, now standing in a room where light was unavoidable. The judge folded his hands. Miss, this is no longer merely a question of parking violations. What you've described suggests a much more serious issue, one involving misuse of authority, falsified presence, and pressure placed upon you. Her breath trembled. For the first time since she'd entered the courtroom, she wasn't performing. She wasn't posturing. She was simply exposed. The judge didn't speak immediately. He let the truth settle. Slow, deliberate, almost therapeutic in its stillness. She sat motionless, shoulders drawn, waiting for the blow she'd spent years bracing for. But the judge surprised everyone. Miss, he said quietly, I think you've been living a life arranged by others. The words slipped into the room like a soft chord, unexpected, steady, and impossibly direct. Her chin lifted an inch, then wavered. She wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. You're not here because of these tickets, he continued. You're here because you've been taught that consequences belong to someone else, and burdens belong to you. Her defenses, already thin, collapsed completely. She didn't sob, didn't cover her face. She simply let the tears appear, unhidden. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet kind of crying that comes from a truth finally spoken aloud. The judge leaned forward slightly. Tell me something, he said. Do you protect him because you fear losing your family? or because you've been convinced you cannot stand without his direction? The question struck her harder than any accusation could have. Her lips parted, but the answer wouldn't form. She stared at her own hands, hands she had used to shuttle cars, carry letters, polish the public image of a man who never asked if she was all right. Your Honor, her voice cracked, I don't think he sees me as me. I'm just a part of his schedule, another obligation to maintain. The gallery, filled with older citizens who'd spent lifetimes raising children, caring for parents, balancing duty and heartbreak, shifted with a tenderness that hadn't been present before. What had begun with irritation had turned into something more human. The girl wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. My whole life, she whispered, I've been told to stay quiet, to not make problems, to keep things smooth. Nobody ever cared where I was that night, just that the logs wouldn't expose him. The judge's expression softened, not with pity, but with recognition. Miss, he said, responsibility is not measured by how much you absorb for others. It is measured by what you choose for yourself. Her breath shook as she released it. He continued, his tone deepening, carrying the weight of the decades he had watched people grow up under pressure, fear, or expectations they never agreed to. Young people are often told that loyalty means silence, that love means compliance. But let me tell you something. Real responsibility is the courage to step out of someone else's shadow. She pressed her palms to her knees, grounding herself. Your father's power, the judge said, does not give him the right to shape your path through intimidation or necessity. And it certainly doesn't give him permission to use you as his alibi. Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in relief. Someone had finally named the truth she'd been afraid to think. Then he delivered the line that made several people in the courtroom inhale sharply. Today, he said, I'm not holding you accountable for the tickets. I'm holding you accountable for allowing grown adults to make you their shield. The impact hit her like a physical force, not punishment, not condemnation, but a release. It was the first time anyone had framed her role not as complicity, but as ensnarement. A woman in the third row clasped her hands, nodding slowly in understanding. A retired veteran lowered his gaze, absorbing the weight of it. The girl's voice returned, soft but steady. I didn't know I had a choice, she said. That, the judge replied, is exactly why you're here. For a moment, the courtroom felt like a sanctuary. No politics, no image, no noise. Just a young woman finally letting herself breathe without pretending to be invincible. And the judge, seeing her clearly for the first time, preparing to guide her toward a truth she'd never been allowed to consider. That her life wasn't supposed to be lived in service to someone else's reputation. The judge let the silence rest for several seconds before delivering his decision. Everyone leaned in, not because the penalties mattered, but because they sensed this moment would define far more than 2 citations. He cleared his throat, his voice calm and firm. The fines will stand, he said. They will be paid in full. This court will not dismiss them, nor will it escalate the matter further. She nodded, expecting the usual sting of embarrassment. But then he continued. However, I am ordering you to return for a follow-up hearing, not for your actions, but for the role your name and your father's influence played in this situation. A low ripple of reaction traveled through the gallery. It wasn't outrage, it was recognition. This judge was not closing the door, he was opening one. You will appear, he said, so we can address how your identity has been used, and how the adults around you may have placed you in harm's way. She didn't look shocked. She looked relieved, as if someone had finally acknowledged what she had been silently carrying. Your Honor, she said, voice small but steady. "Thank you. You're the first person who asked what happened to me, not what he would want me to say." A few people, older, seasoned by decades of watching public figures rise and fall, reacted with soft, measured applause. Not loud, just enough to honor the moment. They weren't clapping for her. They were clapping for justice, spoken plainly. The judge didn't smile. He simply nodded, the gesture dignified and restrained. "Miss," he said, "we are not done. Your situation deserves clarity, and accountability is not reserved for the powerless." She rose slowly. There was no arrogance left, no earbuds, no careless posture. She walked with the fragile certainty of someone stepping into a world she had never navigated on her own. But before she reached the door, the judge added one final thought, delivered with the gravity of a man who had seen entire generations wrestle with the truth. "Remember this," he said. "The law is not a shield for the privileged and not a weapon for the mighty. It is a mirror. And sooner or later, every one of us must face what it reflects." The words hung in the air, quiet, deliberate, almost echoing. She stopped at the threshold, not because anyone called her back, and not out of fear. She paused because, perhaps for the first time, she didn't know what her next step should be unless someone else pointed the way. But no instructions came. She squared her shoulders, inhaled once, and pushed the door open. The room watched her leave, a young woman stepping out not into a punishment, but into a reckoning, a chance to reclaim her own narrative. And as the door clicked shut behind her, the audience, many with silver hair, lined hands, and years of watching life teach its lessons, felt something rare in a courtroom, a quiet belief that justice, when spoken with compassion and courage, could still change a person's path. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the first time she'd ever stood in it alone.